Dennis Hopper has been called one of the great mad geniuses of American pop culture.
He was the outsider artist who railed against the system, and he lived his life his own way on his own terms.
This is one of the characteristics of Dennis Hopper, the veracity, the truth that he's always going for.
As an actor and director, he pushed limits, broke rules, and earned himself a reputation as a hellraiser.
Dennis seems to be looking to substances to manage his intense emotions, and he would fly into uncontrollable rages.
Dennis Hopper represents the Hollywood ethos that really doesn't exist anymore, that of a true rebel.
His long yet erratic career matched the dramatic twists and turns of his personal life. By the time he died in 2010, Hopper was a counterculture icon.
He was an artist. We saw it on screen in his films, we saw it in his photography, and we also saw it in his ability to collect art.
His legacy is huge, and the battles over his estate snowball into a legal mess that tears his family apart.
She stood to receive an estimated $6 million, but if the prenup is triggered and she's found not to meet those conditions, then her inheritance would get slashed down to nothing.
The fame, the fortune, the legacy of Dennis Hopper. From his debut in Rebel Without a Cause to his legacy of portraying villains and eccentric characters in movies such as Apocalypse Now and Blue Velvet, Dennis Hopper created a legacy as one of Hollywood's most iconic and unpredictable actors.
I have different fans for different movies, you know what I mean?
Yes.
I mean, some like Texas Chainsaw Massacre too, you know?
Hopper developed a reputation as kind of a madman. Drugs, violence, and just overall insanity seemed to follow him wherever he went. But Hopper was a fiercely talented guy who seemed to come back from oblivion again and again.
As the director, co-writer, and co-star of what became a cult and celebrated film, Easy Rider, he defined an entire generation and helped spark a new era of filmmaking in Hollywood.
Here is this brash, young, very troubled man making a film about drugs and motorcycles that hit the country at the right time. And it said a lot about what was going on in America. It was all about timing.
But Hopper's creativity and at times volatile temperament combined to make him as many enemies as it did allies, with conflicts that continued long after his death. This is the story of all that he left behind. Dodge City, Kansas, May 17, 1936. Future Hollywood renegade Dennis Lee Hopper is born. His mother, Marjorie May, managed a local swimming pool, and his father, J. Millard Hopper, worked for the Railway Mail Service and was often away on mail runs. When his father enlisted during World War II, Hopper was sent to live with his grandparents on their small farm just outside of town. A lonely boy, he finds his greatest escape on the weekends when his grandmother takes him to the local theater for Saturday matinees.
He says that there's really nothing to look at in Kansas. But the world he sees on the screen is the real world to him, and it makes him feel as if his heart will explode.
Often left to his own devices, Hopper finds another, more troubling form of escape when he discovers that sniffing the gas fumes from the tank of his grandfather's old tractor gives him a buzz.
It's not uncommon for kids to stumble on substances that they can sniff and get some kind of a high, but the fact that he did it every single day means he's either bored or he's looking for an escape. Exposure to harmful chemicals at an early age can have an altering effect on the brain.
Artistic from a young age, when the family moves to San Diego in 1949, Hopper, just 13, decides he wants to be an actor. Joining the Old Globe Theater's children's repertory group and the drama club in high school, Hopper begins honing the craft that will one day lead him to Hollywood.
At 16, he becomes an apprentice at the prestigious local summer theater, the La Jolla Playhouse. But at that point, he has some pretty unglamorous duties, like cleaning dressing rooms and cleaning toilets.
Following his apprenticeship, Hopper performs in one of the Old Globe productions of Shakespeare, where he impresses the directors at the theater.
So they write him a letter of recommendation to a Hollywood casting director. And Hopper, he wastes no time getting to Hollywood. But without a Screen Actors Guild card or an agent, he can't even get an appointment, let alone an audition. Still, he spends 6 months trying.
Scraping together enough cash with a high school friend, the pair rent an apartment in LA. With his letter of recommendation in hand, it doesn't take Hopper long to land an agent.
He gets his SAG card for about $200, which he borrows from the agency. And he now has an agent who gets him his first real break.
In December 1954, less than a year after graduating high school, Hopper is cast as an epileptic in an episode of the TV series Medic.
Dennis Hopper goes to this audition with 32 other actors, and the other actors go in there and do their normal shtick. What Dennis Hopper does is he goes in there, and in the middle of it, he has a seizure. And it's so profound that the person who's in there is calling the ambulance. But in reality, he's acting. He's done something different to get the job, and he gets it.
His first paycheck is for $300, but that's not enough to stay in Hollywood until he can get more work. So he has to move back in with his parents in San Diego.
Hopper gets a job with the phone company, picking up and delivering phone books door to door. Everything changes, however, when his episode of Medic finally airs.
All of a sudden, the phone starts ringing off the hook. He's invited to all sorts of places. And so the first thing he does is he puts on a really good suit, and it's probably his only really good suit, and goes down to Columbia to see Harry Cohn, the legendary Harry Cohn of Columbia Pictures. And that's his entry, his first entry into the world of film.
When Hopper tells Cohn about his love of Shakespeare, Cohn isn't impressed and says the studio will have to deprogram the actor before he's ready for the big screen.
Hopper's not pleased, so he goes off on Cohen, basically telling him to go screw himself. It takes a lot of nerve to spit in the face of Hollywood's most powerful mogul. But hey, that's Dennis Hopper. Well, Hopper and his agent, they're shown the door.
At Warner Brothers, however, Hopper enjoys a much more positive reception when a casting director tells Hopper that if director Nicholas Ray agrees to put him in his next movie, Warner Brothers will sign him to a contract. The movie? Rebel Without a Cause, starring James Dean, Hollywood's hottest young actor.
Nicholas Ray takes one look at Hopper and says, "Yeah, you can be in it." So he lands the part of Goon, a gang member who bullies James Dean's character, Jim Stark.
Signing a standard 7-year contract with Warner Brothers, Hopper arrives on the Rebel set where he meets the young man who will become his mentor.
So at this point, Hopper has a pretty high opinion of himself as an actor. He remembers thinking he's the best young actor in America, if not the world. That is until he observes James Dean, and that humbles him considerably.
When Dennis Hopper meets James Dean, he sees something, and then Dean gives Hopper some advice. He says, be unexpected, do things differently. That's what the way of the future is going to be. And obviously, Dennis Hopper heard it and acted upon it.
Immediately after filming Rebel Without a Cause, Hopper and Dean travel to Texas in the summer of 1955 to shoot Dean's next project, Giant. During filming, the friendship between the two grows even stronger. But on September 30th, less than 2 weeks after wrapping Giant, tragedy strikes. James Dean is killed in a car accident.
He was only 19 when Dean was killed. He idolized James and really looked up to him. He says it's the most personal tragedy of his life. He was devastated by it.
In October of 1955, Rebel Without a Cause lands on the big screen, becoming a massive hit. A year later, Giant is released and is another smash hit. But despite Hopper's strong performances, it's Dean who gets the most attention. In 1958, Hopper is cast in a small role in the film From Hell to Texas. He clashes with veteran director Henry Hathaway, and on the last day of filming, Hopper refuses to do a scene the way Hathaway wants. After many hours, studio executives arrive on set.
Hopper takes 80 takes, and that's an insane number of takes until he finally takes the director's orders. At the end of it, Hathaway tells him, "Kid, you'll never work in this town again." Warner Brothers, they cancel his contract, and now he's labeled a troublemaker and a rebel.
With few prospects in Hollywood, in 1959, Hopper heads to New York to study acting with legendary teacher Lee Strasberg, founder of the Actors Studio. It takes him 6 months before he's finally accepted into Strasberg's class.
When he was in New York, he would go to galleries, he would go to see poets, he would do anything that would expand his understanding of what art was, because if he could understand that, he could understand more of his own motivations and how to be a better actor.
It's very, very dangerous to go in the water right after you've eaten.
Maybe.
In 1961, Hopper is cast in his first lead role in the thriller Night Tide.
Wait a minute. I don't even know your name. My name's Johnny.
I am called Mora.
He plays a sailor who falls in love with a mermaid.
The only acting gigs that are coming his way are minor roles on shows like The Twilight Zone, Bonanza, and Gunsmoke. Not bad for a day player, but certainly not the roles that Hopper's ego feels that he deserves.
Having alienated half of Hollywood with his short temper and antagonistic behavior, Hopper feels studios are avoiding him. But the Tinseltown rebel has no way of knowing that soon he'll be one of Hollywood's biggest stars. Though he shared the big screen with James Dean, Dennis Hopper's career has stalled, thanks mainly to his bad habit of making enemies every time he opens his mouth.
I mean, that warm, friendly small talk just turns me right off.
In the spring of 1961, Hopper makes his Broadway debut in the play Mandingo. Though it closes after only a week, he falls in love with his co-star, Brooke Hayward.
After Hopper tells Brooke that he's interested in photography, she spends her last $351 for a Nikon camera for him. And he carries it around constantly, always taking tons of pictures. Through Brooke, he also meets legendary actor/stoner Peter Fonda, who becomes a really important figure in his life.
Hopper and Brooke marry in August 1961. The newlyweds soon return to California, and on June 26, 1962, their daughter Marin is born. As he did in New York, Hopper immerses himself in LA's modern art scene while continuing his own photography and painting. He also begins collecting the work of other top-name artists. Soon Hopper lands a string of small parts on various TV dramas, including playing a beatnik poet on Petticoat Junction.
You're a dove. I'm an eagle. I'm screaming at life. I'm longing just to tear it wide open.
But his next movie offer comes from a most unlikely source. Henry Hathaway, the same director who once told Hopper he'd never work in Hollywood again, casts the actor in the western The Sons of Katie Elder, starring John Wayne.
While he was on the set, down in Mexico, he saw that there was an impact that this Hollywood company had on this small Mexican village. And it became the germ of an idea, and the germ became a script, and that script became the script for the last movie.
The last movie becomes Hopper's pet project. The story is about a film being shot in a small Peruvian town, and when production ends, one of the performers stays there to live.
And he pitches it to everybody, and it falls on deaf ears.
When he can't get financing for his movie, he goes into a downward spiral using LSD and peyote. Dennis seems to be looking to substances to manage his intense emotions, and he would fly into uncontrollable rages.
Hopper continues playing minor roles in movies such as Paul Newman's Cool Hand Luke. Then in 1967, he appears with his friend Peter Fonda in the cult classic The Trip. Written by another friend, a young, unknown actor named Jack Nicholson. Hopper and Fonda begin collaborating on a project, an avant-garde road trip story about a pair of hippie drug dealers they call Easy Rider. After cobbling together some money, they embark on the shoot, with Hopper behind the camera for the first time.
There's a lot of improvisation, but there's also some problems on the set. Hopper is doing a bit too much drugs. He is getting paranoid, and the relationship between Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper deteriorated to the point where they were hardly speaking to each other.
The film isn't the only thing in trouble. Hopper's marriage to Brooke is also on the rocks.
Brooke later says that he's really deep into LSD. He's also been battling with the booze for quite some time.
During a drunken argument with Brooke, Hopper punches her in the face, breaking her nose. Brooke files for divorce, charging Hopper with extreme cruelty. The divorce is granted in February 1969, just months before Easy Rider is released.
She sues for divorce, and he basically says, fine, you can have it all. You can have the house, you can have the kids, you can have the artwork, but he kept his rights to Easy Rider. California was what's known as a community property state. Assets generated in the course of the marriage are presumed to be equally divisible between the divorcing parties. She probably said, you know, Dennis, you're such a loser, you broke my nose, you drink too much, you can keep your stupid film. I think it ended up grossing about $40 million, so it was a shrewd piece of bargaining on his part.
When it's released in July 1969, Easy Rider is a box office smash, becoming the third highest grossing film of the year. Hopper wins the first film award at Cannes and is nominated for an Oscar as co-writer of the screenplay.
This film cost less than $500,000. It was an indie production, and it made gobs and gobs and gobs of money. And all of a sudden, light bulbs are going off all through Hollywood. Oh, let's make more low-budget, youth-oriented films. If it works once, it'll work 4 times.
Having successfully dialed into the counterculture, the studios now believe Hopper has his finger on the pulse of what young audiences want to see. Given free rein to choose his next film, Hopper decides to revive his pet project, The Last Movie.
Universal gave him what looked like a fantastic deal given industry standards at the time. They gave him an operating budget of $850,000 to $1 million, which was a considerable sum, $500 a week for living expenses, and half the gross proceeds of the film, or 50%. It looked as though his fortunes were on the rise.
Flying to Peru to direct and star in The Last Movie in early 1970, Hopper's personal demons aren't far behind. On set, drugs and alcohol flow freely. Co-star Chris Christopherson later recalls that Hopper is as crazy as it gets and claims he's the most self-destructive guy Christopherson has ever seen.
On the set, Hopper says he went through a mountain of coke and that substances and wild sex and drinking fueled his creativity. He said, "We might have been drug addicts, but we were drug addicts with a point of view and a work ethic."
Arriving back in LA 8 weeks later, Hopper announces his engagement to the Mamas and the Papas singer Michelle Phillips, who has a role in The Last Movie. In March 1970, with money pouring in from Easy Rider, Hopper buys a house in Taos, New Mexico, a city known as an artist's colony.
Reportedly, he pays between $140,000 and $180,000 for the house, and then he spends another $80,000 to renovate it. He then uses the house as a post-production facility for The Last Movie. He also purchases a 132-seat theater in Ranchos de Taos to screen footage while he edits it.
On October 30th, 1970, Hopper and Phillips are wed. The marriage, however, collapses just a week later when Phillips accuses Hopper of calling her a witch, handcuffing her to stop her from leaving, and firing guns inside the house. It appears as though Hopper is losing his grip. He spends an entire year editing The Last Movie.
He was confused, drug-addled, and paranoid, and probably very lazy, because that's what the film looks like. It looks like it's paranoid and lazy, a self-indulgent piece. The fact of the matter is, his last movie could have been his last movie.
When The Last Movie is released in September 1971 in New York, it proves a monumental failure. Reviews are scathing, and it's pulled from distribution soon after. Once again, Hopper is Hollywood pariah. Distraught, he returns to Taos.
In hindsight, he says that he should have gone back to LA and made himself more visible. But he's not there to defend himself against what people are saying about him in Hollywood. You know, he's a drug addict, he's unreliable, he's a drunk. He's just not going to defend himself.
Dennis was so out of control that he had to do coke every 5 minutes. Later, he said that he never made the connection between the terrible things that were happening in his life and his drinking and drugging.
Shortly after meeting actress Daria Halprin, Hopper and she marry on May 14, 1972. 2 years later, she gives birth to a daughter, Ruth Anna. But once again, Hopper's addictions poison his marriage, and they divorce in 1976. That same year, Hopper is given yet another chance at a fresh start when producer Fred Roos offers him a part in director Francis Ford Coppola's Vietnam War epic, Apocalypse Now.
Now, this is a chance for him to work with Marlon Brando, the most revered actor of his generation. Hopper desperately needs the work, but he still insists on one condition, that he be given at least one line of dialogue with Marlon Brando. Coppola agrees.
Hopper goes to Manila for filming in September 1976. By all accounts, production is chaotic for many reasons, but Hopper also continues feeding his insatiable drug habit.
Dennis Hopper plays a photojournalist who's drug-addled throughout the whole thing. I see him bringing some of his own drug-addled abuse that he did with himself. This role brings back Dennis Hopper in a way that probably would not have happened if he didn't bring that kind of veracity to it.
As Hopper works sporadically in movies such as Francis Ford Coppola's Rumblefish and Sam Peckinpah's The Osterman Weekend, his drug use only gets worse.
His addictions have escalated to the point where he's now doing speedballs and often hallucinating and having delusions.
In 1983, while filming a movie in Mexico, Hopper loses it completely, wandering a Mexican highway naked and hallucinating with visions of spaceships filling his head. He lands in jail before being taken to a local hospital. Shipped back to LA, his friends check him into rehab.
When he leaves rehab, he quits drinking completely for a year. But he continues to do drugs. Alcohol withdrawal reportedly makes him delirious, and he starts hearing voices.
Once one of Hollywood's most promising young talents, Dennis Hopper's drug abuse now threatens to destroy not only his career, but his mind. Dragged into rehab by friends, Hollywood star Dennis Hopper has a choice to make. Continue life as an alcoholic and drug addict, or get clean and save his career. In 1984, Hopper is transferred to the psych ward at Cedars-Sinai Hospital. There, he finally quits hard drugs and alcohol. Upon release, he moves to Venice, California.
He buys one of 3 studios created by famous architect Frank Gehry for the bargain price of $90,000. He later buys the other Gehry buildings, which he connects with adjacent walkways, and eventually purchases the adjacent property to build a home on. Years later, he purchases a home near the main house, which he turns into a guest house. At this point, he has an entire compound.
Upon hearing that Hopper is sobered up, acclaimed director David Lynch casts him as a deranged criminal in the director's art house masterpiece, Blue Velvet.
Frank Booth is one of the scariest, weirdest people you'll ever meet on the screen. David Lynch says Dennis Hopper called him up and said, "I have to play Frank Booth. Frank Booth is me." And you can see he brings all that anguish that he went through as he explored drugs and everything else into that role, and it's all the dark side of Dennis Hopper. And that is what makes it so good, because we see that dark side and we are afraid. We're very afraid that someone like Frank Booth will enter our lives.
Released in 1986, Blue Velvet earns Hopper tremendous reviews and a Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actor.
In 1986, he's also rediscovered as a photographer. He has 2 solo exhibits, one in England and one in New York.
In 1986, Hopper scores a second hit as the reclusive alcoholic father of a high school basketball player in Hoosiers. This time, he's nominated for both an Oscar and a Golden Globe.
He now has a few offers on the table. One of them comes from Sean Penn, Hollywood's enfant terrible. Penn is a huge Dennis Hopper fan, and he wants him to direct his new film, The LA Gang Story Colors.
The studio has seen a lot of Hopper's work and agrees to take the chance with him directing. It's his first directing job in a decade.
The movie comes out in '88, and it's a commercial success, and it's got some critical acclaim as well. One of the knocks against the film was that it was too violent, but it shows something, and there's a truth in there. This is one of the characteristics of Dennis Hopper, the veracity, the truth that he's always going for.
In June 1989, Hopper marries his 4th wife, actress Catherine Lanassa. She's 22, he's 53. The next year, their son Henry is born, but the marriage doesn't last, and the two divorce 3 years later in the spring of 1992. Feeling blessed with a second shot at an acting career, Hopper seems to leap at every offer thrown his way, for better or for worse.
In 1993, he turns out one of his most awful performances in the ill-conceived Super Mario Brothers movie. He says that the experience was unpleasant for him. Well, it wasn't just unpleasant for him, it was also unpleasant for the movie audiences that actually saw it, so it's no small wonder that the movie was a flop. And eventually, Hopper admits the obvious. He did it for the money.
While filming Super Mario Brothers in Wilmington, North Carolina, Hopper buys a painting studio. This was a recently condemned 5-story building that he bought for $144,000 and then put another $1 million into it to fix it up. So I guess you could say at least one good thing came out of that movie.
When he's not shooting, Hopper returns to his love for photography and painting, with his work exhibited in galleries around the world. He continues to carve out a niche throughout the 90s, playing fascinating villains in movies such as True Romance and Speed. But over 2 decades after the phenomenal success of Easy Rider, Hopper has a beef about his share of the profits.
Fonda and Hopper and another individual wrote Easy Rider. They made an agreement about how this was going to be distributed. When the film was ultimately distributed, he felt that he'd been aced out of, I think, 8 percentage points of the profits, that he was given a third, he was entitled to 41%. Peter Fonda, a different view. So he sued, and in the end, Fonda relented.
2 years later, in 1997, the case is settled, but the details are never disclosed. By now, Hopper has a new woman in his life, actress Victoria Duffy, who is 31 years his junior.
I'm an actress. Oh, no, it's always I'm an actress. I'm an actress and a singer.
In April 1996, she becomes his 5th wife.
Mr. Hopper was either lucky in love or unlucky, depending on how you look at it. By the time he got to wife number 5, he was cradle robbing. He picks a woman some 31 years younger than he, and he asks her for a prenuptial agreement. A prenuptial agreement is sort of, in my view, the death of romance in the United States. I love you, dear, and I'll share my entire life with you, except for the following things. And he didn't want to provide her with alimony or much by way of support in the event of the dissolution of their marriage. Once his wife's lawyer took a look at the prenuptial agreement, he must have said something lawyerly like, "Are you out of your bleeping mind? This deal is awful." She was love-struck and probably figured she could sweet-talk Dennis into seeing things her way if he just lived long enough.
Part of the prenup agreement states that Victoria would receive 25% of Hopper's estate when he passes, only if they are still married and living together. But for now, Hopper and Victoria seem to be spending most of the wealth, and Hopper has to keep working to bankroll their expensive lifestyle. And he also has 3 kids and 4 divorces behind him.
He can't afford to turn anything down. So it's no surprise that he turns up in such miserable dreck like Space Truckers and The Blackout. Remember those? Didn't think so.
Dennis Hopper is doing what I call, I need to put an addition on my house roll. You're not necessarily mailing it in, but you're taking a roll and you're doing it because you need the money. You're putting an addition on your house. Your kid is going to college. We all do it. He needed the money, so he took roles that came along. And none of these roles were all really that good or that in-depth, but you know, it kept him out there and he paid his bills.
Him and Victoria are very good at spending money. They spend a lot of it. He buys back all of the pop art that he lost in his divorces, and now it's even more expensive. He also commissions Julian Schnabel to do a portrait of him and Victoria. And he gives Victoria a couple of credit cards, which she maxes out each month at $5,000 each.
In 2003, Victoria gives birth to their daughter, Galen. Hopper takes his first television role in decades in 2008. Playing a drug-crazed music producer in the TV adaptation of the Oscar-winning movie Crash.
In September 2009, he's scheduled to do a promotional tour, but he's come down with a mysterious stomach ailment and he's just not feeling up to the task. He's rushed to the hospital.
In October, his manager announces that Hopper has prostate cancer and has to focus on treatment. By January 2010, the cancer has spread to his bones. The prognosis is grim, and his days are numbered. Less than 2 weeks later, Hopper surprises everyone by filing for divorce from Victoria after almost 14 years of marriage.
Clearly, this was a man of volcanic and tempestuous passions. 5 wives suggests a restless spirit. This was probably evidence that he wanted it his way in the final chapter, and she just had to go.
Reportedly, the relationship is strained. The couple fights often, and by the time Hopper files for divorce, they're already living separate lives.
He's alone when suddenly she reappears. This woman he'd effectively been estranged from. She comes back and is with him in New York and says, "I'm here, I'll take care of you in your final moments. I'll take care of you until you die." But he shouldn't have been too surprised, because if he recalled the prenuptial agreement, she had a windfall coming if she was both married to him and living with him at the time of his death.
According to the prenuptial agreement, if they are still married and living together, then she's entitled to 25% of his estate at least, plus another $250,000 in life insurance payout. This means that she stood to receive an estimated $6 million. But if the prenup is triggered and she's found not to meet those conditions, then her inheritance would get slashed down to nothing.
Doctors say Dennis Hopper has only 4 months left to live. But with the fate of his estate riding on a deathbed divorce, those 4 months promise to be some of the most drama-filled of his wild and turbulent life. In January 2010, just as news surfaces that Dennis Hopper's cancer is terminal, he files for divorce from Victoria, his wife of nearly 14 years. That sets in motion a firestorm of accusations, lawsuits, and bitter disputes.
Reportedly, in October of 2009, Victoria learns that Dennis Hopper has changed his estate plan. When she confronts him about it, he said he didn't want to do it, but he was being pressured by his adult children and advisors. Dennis Hopper changed his life insurance beneficiary designation, so Victoria Duffy was no longer included. And reportedly, he also excluded her as a beneficiary under his trust.
By the end of 2009, sources report that Hopper's children have moved him into a suite at the Beverly Hills Hotel to get him away from Victoria. But Victoria continues to live on the property with their daughter, Galen.
All hell's breaking loose at the Hopper compound at this point. I think she's fighting for the perception that she was present, his wife, ready, willing, and available, and living with him, at least in the same compound at the time of his death, to protect her share of the estate. If he dies, she doesn't want there to be loose ends to be untangled in a court proceeding somewhere. The quickest and cleanest cash is to be on his $1 million life insurance policy. So clearly her eyes are on the prize.
The following month, a judge grants Hopper a restraining order against Victoria after he describes her as volatile and mentally unstable. He says he's also angry that she took their daughter Galen away at Christmas. But Victoria claims she didn't want Galen exposed to all his drug use, loaded guns in the house, and verbal abuse directed at Victoria. Per the order, Victoria isn't allowed within 10 feet of the star. In turn, Victoria files a declaration that due to his illness, Hopper is mentally incapable of making decisions for himself. She alleges his children are pressuring him to push her out of the picture, so they get a bigger piece of his estate.
A physician attests in the course of that proceeding that Hopper is of sound mind and body. Here's evidence that he was the one who had both oars in the water. She might have been flying free in the wind.
On March 26, 2010, a frail-looking Hopper is given a star on Hollywood's Walk of Fame.
Everyone here today have enriched my life tremendously. They've shown me a world that I would never have seen being a farm boy from Dodge City, Kansas.
His appearance is a stark reminder to fans that his end is truly growing near. On April 5th, he and Victoria's attorneys argue in LA Superior Court over Victoria's requests for child and spousal support. Since Hopper is undergoing radical chemotherapy, he doesn't attend the hearing.
The attorney in the divorce claims Hopper is too sick to work, and he only has about $300,000 in liquid assets, and he has monthly medical bills of about $26,000. Despite this, the judge orders $8,000 a month to go to Victoria in spousal support, plus another $4,000 a month as child support for their daughter Galen. On one hand, this seems like a very harsh ruling given the state of his financial affairs and of course his illness. But on the other hand, this is Dennis Hopper, so with the royalties, image rights, and all the other property he's collected, there should be plenty of money to support Victoria during the divorce.
The judge orders Hopper to pay Victoria's mortgage, utilities, put money towards her horses, and pay $200,000 in attorney fees. What's really interesting is that the judge rules that Victoria has the right to continue to live on Dennis Hopper's estate, just not in the main house.
Fireworks continued. Hopper sought to exclude his daughter from any life insurance policies that she was on, and the judge wouldn't have anything of it. I think his concern was this was a minor child, whatever wrangling her parents were involved in, she was entitled to their care and support. Here was a man who was about to die. The court wanted to make sure that there was life insurance to secure the income stream, so that if Hopper died, the child would be cared for. So the judge said, "No way, Dennis, you're not behaving well." She stays on the policy.
On May 29, 2010, the Hollywood outlaw finally loses his battle with cancer and dies in his Venice, California home at 74 years of age. At his funeral, a few days later in Rancho de Taos, New Mexico, Jack Nicholson and Peter Fonda paid tribute to the icon. Hopper's son Henry reads poetry by Walt Whitman, bringing the crowd to tears. But one family member is noticeably absent.
Absent from the funeral is his 7-year-old daughter, Galen. And it came about in the worst sort of way. Mr. Hopper made it clear that they didn't want Victoria present at the funeral, and she said, in effect, "Fine, Galen's not coming without me." The child was a victim, frankly, of the intrafamilial squabbling incident to the divorce. It's a sad chapter.
Though Hopper is gone, the battles rage on. The big question is, what will happen to Hopper's fortune, estimated to be worth $40 million?
Victoria first argues that they were still married and living together even though the divorce proceeding was going on. Of course, if she was right in this argument, she would get, under the prenup, a quarter of his estate at the very least. However, the argument doesn't hold much water because even though they are still technically married because the divorce wasn't finalized, she was only living on the same compound as Dennis Hopper, so does that really qualify as living together?
In October of 2010, Victoria files a $45 million lawsuit against the estate. She makes a $10 million claim for defamation against her in the divorce. She also says she lost about $2.2 million in earnings that she would have made if she was an actress.
She's claiming, wait a minute, I put my life on hold. I didn't pursue my education, my career, my other opportunities. When I married this man 31 years older than myself, well, look, I interrupted my natural life cycle. Shouldn't I be paid? Poor me. So she sought $700,000 for her efforts. I just find this May to December claim, I married an older man and therefore I missed the best years of my life, to border on the ludicrous. She also claimed that support obligations weren't paid, and in fairness to her, it was her role to make sure that her daughter was cared for.
In November 2010, a partial settlement is reached.
Because of the partial settlement, Hopper's Trust is free to sell the artwork, 40% of the proceeds of which are going to go into trust for Galen. The settlement does not spell out what happens to the other 60% of the sale proceeds, which means that it's going to pass under the terms of Dennis Hopper's trust. The settlement does specify that Victoria gets another $4,000 a month for Galen for child support, plus $6,000 a month on top of that as family support. The settlement finally clears the way for Hopper's trustees to start selling his personal property, which is really important because this estate is so cash poor.
The compound immediately went to market in the wake of his death for about $6.2 million. It didn't sell. 2 years passed and it finally sold for $5 million. But not until there was a lot more pushing and shoving about Victoria. She was on the estate and was making it difficult to move it.
Will the ongoing disputes over his estate continue to tarnish Dennis Hopper's legacy? Or will those who once loved him find a way to share the proceeds of one of Hollywood's most controversial careers? Dennis Hopper was a hard-living movie star and filmmaker whose career spanned nearly 6 decades. The battles over his estate started before he died in 2010, but continued to rage more than 2 years after his death. Hopper has a massive collection of modern art, which his estate can now sell. In November 2010, Christie's auctions 40 pieces from the Dennis Hopper collection.
There's lots of work from big-name artists, including a Basquiat that sells for $6 million, a Lichtenstein that sells for $2 million, and an Andy Warhol painting of Dennis Hopper himself that sells for nearly $1 million. In all, the auction brought in over $12 million to the estate.
In September 2012, the estate announces that a settlement has finally been reached.
According to the lawyers and published reports, once the settlement is reached, Galen and Victoria together are going to get 40% of the estate, with 17% going to Victoria and 23% being held in trust for Galen. Victoria also gets the right to be a co-trustee of Galen's trust, so that the portion of the money set aside for Galen, she will have input into it, and Galen can receive it at different times throughout her life. One thing is clear, there's enough money there to take care of Galen for her life, which I'm sure would have to give Dennis Hopper some comfort. The big question will be, of course, how would he have felt about Victoria Hopper getting her hands on any of this money? And that's an answer we'll never know.
In 2012, a chapter closes and the estate settles. The largest share of the estate goes to his youngest daughter, and that's really the way it should be. She's got the longer portion of her life ahead of her. She's not yet had been educated, cared for, raised. She's got a lot of foreseeable expenses, so I think it was the right result. It's hard to know what Mr. Hopper's motives were. Some people say it was just vindictive. I think he probably genuinely believed she'd be cared for. There was going to be enough money to go around. I think he just wanted to control how it was spread around, and he didn't want his ex-wife to have access to it.
Galen receives $2.8 million and $600,000 worth of property from Hopper's estimated $40 million estate, while 60% of the estate is split among Hopper's 3 adult children, Marin, Ruthanna, and Henry. While his family has been busy fighting over his money, Hopper's personal artwork has been growing in acclaim, with a major exhibition at the Museum of Contemporary Art in LA.
There are photos of actors, artists, and some of his more exotic travels. Hopper said that he was sure that his photography would be his only existing legacy. Little did he know how wrong he was about that. And the fact was, he's long remembered as one of Hollywood's biggest screen legends.
Since 2010, the Hopper Art Trust, founded by his estate, has been preserving his artistic legacy and showcasing his work around the globe. On May 17, 2014, what would have been Hopper's 78th birthday, a motorcycle rally is held in Ranchos de Taos, New Mexico, as an homage to Easy Rider's legacy. Dozens of motorcyclists ride through some of the locations made famous in the film, and fans flock to Hopper's grave.
Dennis Hopper was a wild man. I'll miss him and his performances. I didn't realize that his personal life was quite so chaotic. I gather that he didn't have to work too hard to prepare for some of his roles. He just probably knocked back a few and said, let Dennis be Dennis.
Dennis Hopper was in the movie business for 5 decades. 5 decades. Despite his self-abuse and his self-destructiveness, he managed to survive. So obviously he had a very strong will to live. He was an artist. We saw it on screen in his films, we saw it in his photography, and we also saw it in his ability to collect art. This is a man who brought intelligence to all his artistic pursuits.
Dennis Hopper represents the Hollywood ethos that really doesn't exist anymore, that of a true rebel. He was the outsider artist who railed against the system, and he lived his life his own way, on his own terms.